All right, good morning. Good morning. I am live and I'm back. So it's December. It is December, y'all. It is December. Happy December. My dog is having a party out there. I don't know if you hear him or not, but he is having a party. You're going to hear him kind of, there he is. There he is. He's wide awake today. I don't know what's going on. Maybe he's excited. It's December as well. So I am I had to block him out. I feel bad because he likes to hang out with me under my desk, but I decided he can't hang out. He's too wired up today. So yeah. So it's December 1st. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I can't believe the month of November is over. And here we are. Here we are into December. I began this journey for 30 days. I said that for 30 days, I would do the Songs of Psalms. And yesterday was supposed to be my last day. And I thought to myself, it's my last day when I signed off. I didn't think I'd be back because, I felt like I did what I was supposed to do. But then in thinking about it, I felt like I had built this momentum of talking about songwriting and talking about some of the things that David went through. And I felt like, I do have to keep this momentum going. Because there's something about being a life learner. And I felt like I was learning so much. And I didn't really want to let that go. I wanted to just continue that and build upon that. And so, when you set your heart to learn and to grow and to explore and to dive deeper, it causes you to enlarge, right? Enlarge emotionally, intellectually. And so I wanted to enlarge my understanding, especially because songwriting, music is such an important part of who I am. So throughout the last few weeks, I've learned so many important things. And it wasn't just songwriting that I learned. It wasn't just songwriting ideas and concepts, but it was mostly life lessons that I learned. And I do believe that life lessons are more important to learn than just learning how to write a song. And so, one of the things that stood out to me during Monday and Tuesday's look into Psalms 20 and 21 is the in-depth trust that David had in God. He had put no value in what he can do or accomplish in his own right. Like he didn't put value in what he could do. He was so skillful just about in anything that he did. He was so skillful and he didn't put value in that. So those Psalms made it clear how dependent David was on the Lord, right? He said, some trust in chariots and horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And it just made me think, like, how often do I really, really trust in the Lord? Like truly, truly trust in the Lord. A lot of times, I think about like, there's things I can do easily. I don't have to blink. I can just get it done. And I trust in my own ability. And I've spoken about this before. But David taught me that he didn't put his trust in himself. He didn't put his trust in the things that he could do and how skillful he was. And it made me think about the conversations that I've had with myself and also with other people. It made me, just what I've learned in those two Psalms, it made me reconsider how I want to speak going forward. I don't want to be so what is that word? Like when you're just so confident. Yes, it's important to be confident. I'm not saying not to be confident. It is important to feel and be confident. But there's a difference between confidence and trust, right? Like I trust that what God put in me is going to help me accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished, right? And so I need to change my language. I need to change my language the way David did. The way David had his language, right? I don't want to have confidence in my own ability, like I can get things done. I know that I can get things done. And in the past, I would be like, yeah, I could do that. And yes, I'm good at this and this and that. And yes, it's good. It's good for all of us to be good in something. In fact, not to just be good, to be great in the things we're called to do, right? David was great at conquering and pointing people back to God. He was great at those things, but we can only be great because it's the God that lives in us. Good morning, Abby. Abby, I'm back, girl. I came back. God bless you, girl. God bless you. I'm giving a little bit of a talk here before I dive into this next new psalm that I'm going to be talking about, Psalm 22. But going back to what David wrote in Psalm 21, right? David, he didn't mention how great his army fought. He didn't mention how strong his men were, or how brave they were, how skillful they are at fighting. And David didn't take any credit for teaching them fighting skills. He didn't say, because I spent time with them in the war room, teaching them what they had to do, this is why they won the fight. This is why they won the battle. No, he didn't say none of that. That wasn't ever the way he spoke. He would simply sing about the greatness of God and how God defeated his enemies. He never talked about how the army defeated the enemies. His songs were always God focused. And in his language, he didn't have room to speak about what he can do and how he could get it done. His only speech was about what God can do. And that was life-changing for me. That was really life-changing for me because I felt like a lot of times we just talk about what we can do, right? And we don't give enough credit to the Lord and what he's done. So yes, the way David said, some trust in chariots and horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And you can go back to Psalm 20 and 21, because these two Psalms were connected. One was about the prayer and one was about the praise. One prayed for protection over a battle, and the other one was praise because the battle had been won. So you can go back and reread that and read David's heart and love and devotion to the Lord. And so I spoke about it. Amen. Abby says, absolutely. That's so true. Yeah. So I felt like, I can't stop this journey. That's why I'm back here today. I couldn't stop because every time I dug in, I learned something new, and it sort of corrected my thinking. And that's what the Word of God does. It corrects, it inspires, it encourages. It looks into our heart and exposes some of the things that need to come out of our heart. So that's why I came back. And I'm going to continue this until the Lord, puts it in my heart not to continue anymore. And it's time to move on to something else. So that's why I'm back. And I just want to talk a little bit about how David used his prayers in these songs to deal with life, right? He dealt with life through these songs. And when David wrote these songs, he wasn't writing it the way we write songs today, right? Today we focus on the verse and the hook. And, the way songs are written today, you have to get to the hook within the first minute of the song. Like you got to get right to the hook, because otherwise people's attention just, it doesn't cling, it doesn't hang on. So you got to get to the hook pretty quickly. You have your bridge, you have your vamp. And that's not how David wrote songs, right? This Psalm 22, my goodness, this psalm has 31 verses, 31, right? David wrote what was in his heart, and he gave expression to all the emotions he felt. If he had fear, or if he had doubt and uncertainty, if he had confidence, if he had praise, he was going to write about it. And because, good morning, Miss Shabri. Good morning, my love. Happy Wednesday, hump day. Happy Wednesday to you guys. So I'm talking about, good to see you, my friend. Thank you. Good to see you too. We're going to catch up later, okay? Talking about life and songwriting. They're connected, right? Music and life are connected. And so because these Psalms were written down and they were passed down by scribes from one generation to the next, we have a peek into what was happening during those times. There were times of battles, times of infighting. David had to deal with the people around him. Those were his biggest thorns in his flesh. And he wasn't dearly loved as we would like to believe. David wasn't always dearly loved. People in his own house wanted to take him out. They wanted him dead. And so that's why, to me, it was very important for him to depend on God to protect him, because he knew how to fight. He knew how to defend himself from armies, right? He knew how to go into a camp and defeat the enemy. But what he couldn't do, he couldn't trust the people around him. He didn't know who to trust because so many people wanted him out. And so that's why I believe he was so God-focused. Everything he did was dependent on the Lord. He couldn't depend, on himself, because I believe, if God didn't protect him, he would be dead. He knew, there's my dog. I don't know if you hear him, but yeah, there must be somebody out there. I apologize for the barking. But he knew that his fighting and hiding skills can only get him so far, right? He can only get him so far. David had to, he had to think about the foreign enemies that wanted him dead. And he had to fight and defend himself against them to protect his kingdom. But ironically, he had frenemies in his own household that wanted him dead too. So imagine being in that constant turmoil in life. You're facing enemies on the inside and you're facing enemies on the outside, right? How could there be peace in his life? And so I'm sure, that he had to have men around him that would protect him and keep guard over him, to stand at his bedroom door and trust that they would watch him. But, people are humans. They'll fall asleep. Like they fell asleep with Jesus. The disciples fell asleep with Jesus, right? But I love in Psalm 121, where it says that my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. So imagine that. Imagine your heavenly Father. He's the one that watches over us day and night. He doesn't slumber. And that word slumber, it means he's not taking a little cat nap. He's not dozing off. He's not getting drowsy. Like when you're sitting there for a little while and you're like, you just get so relaxed and you start getting drowsy, you see people in church falling asleep because they're so relaxed. But that's not the Lord. That's not how the Lord is. He never slumbers nor sleep. He's always watching, always guarding. And David understood that. He understood that. He knew that God watched over him. And even if his guards fell asleep, that he would not fall asleep on him. He had confidence in the Lord. So to me, it's no wonder that David used music as a form of relief and comfort. Music had always been his companion. Music was his companion. He could express to the Lord the deepest things that he felt. He could use the healing power of music to comfort his heart and bring peace to himself, right? Because music heals. And when we're in distress, right, we should take a little, go to YouTube. YouTube has a lot of, instrumentals. Just play a little piano instrumental. Play that over yourself. Oh, Shabri had said yes to the scribes. She made that comment earlier. Okay. Take a piano instrumental and play that over yourself. And I promise you, the peace that enters your soul is just incredible. So let me just go into quickly because I don't have too much time. And this psalm is long and I'm only going to do a couple of verses, right? I'm going to break it up into 3 parts. So today is part 1. And I'm going to try to get in as much as I can now in the short amount of time that I had. This was a long intro that I had, but I felt like today's a new day and I had to explain a couple of things. Okay, so here we go. Again, this is another Psalm of David. Psalm 22 is another Psalm of David. And this time, he's telling the director of music, he says, I want you to play this in the tune of the doe of the morning, right? So it says in my header, I don't know, which version you read it from, the NIV version, it just says, for the director of music to the tune of the doe of the morning, a Psalm of David. Now that must have been a mighty sad song or sad melody, because this psalm is so sad. This psalm is so sad. It's so sad that even it was spoken of years and years later, and we'll get into that. But David was like, the only song, I'm not going to recreate a tune, or I'm not going to recreate a melody. We're going to use this same melody for these words that I have to say. And, back then, can I just say, back then, they didn't have copyright issues, right? You can write a song on top of another song. And you see that often in the Psalms. It'll say, to the tune of da, da, da. They just used other tunes. They weren't trying to recreate. But, you can't do that today. No. You cannot write lyrics on top of another melody. I mean, if, of course, you can do it for commercials and things like that, but like, don't release music based on somebody else's melody, because you will get hit with a lawsuit so big, your 10th generation gonna be paying up for it. Just ask Robin Thicke or Pharrell or Ed Sheeran. All right, I'm getting off topic. Let me get back to David. The first verse that David uses says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? So he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Where have we heard this before? Where have we heard this? My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus said it. Jesus used the same line when he was on the cross. He used this very same sentence. Jesus quoted David. And this psalm depicts how anguished David was, to express how alone he felt. My God, why have you forsaken me? Like, he expected other people to forsake him. He knew he was alone most of the time. Some of his kids weren't treating him right. His, who knows how many wives were not treating him right, didn't understand him. But for God to forsake him, he felt forsaken by God. And he said, why? Why have you forsaken me? Right? That's sad. And imagine how Jesus felt on the cross. He used the same line. Imagine how lonely Jesus felt on the cross at that moment. You know, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Not even the Father at that moment could help him. To me, that's an intense and unbearable thought, to be so alone, right? Everyone hates you. Everyone is against you. And this is for David, right? Everyone was against him. And the only person that he could depend on was the Father. And he felt so alone, so helpless. And Jesus, had to endure because that was his assignment. He had to be forsaken for that moment that he was on the cross. And if you think about it, it could just bring tears to your eyes, right? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? It's sad. It's sad. And like I mentioned before, David used music to express the deepest emotions and questions of his heart. And imagine how hopeless he felt. Okay, let me move on. Verse 2, my God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, and I find no rest. So David didn't hide, right? We know he didn't hide his love for the Lord, but he also didn't hide his fears, his doubts. We see that right here. His questions, like, I'm crying out to you, but I find no rest. Day and night, I'm calling out to you, but you're not hearing me. He sung this. He sung this. He cried out and he felt like God wasn't answering him. Like the Father just completely turned away. But let's look at verses 3 and 5 real quick. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one that Israel praises. In you, our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. To you, they cried out and were saved. In you, they trusted and were not put to shame. So here, David is comforting himself. And he's doing that by going back into history. Like, he knows that he's a product of people that went before him, people who trusted in the Lord and were delivered by him, right? He said, to you, they cried out and were saved. In you, they trusted and were not put to shame. He had to latch on to what he could remember of the past, that God had been faithful in the past. And that's a good reminder for us that when we're going through something, we're going to have those moments where we feel like, we were thrown out on the curb. We were thrown out on the curb. Those moments of desperation when we feel alone and abandoned, we got to go back. You got to go back and remind yourself of the times that God was faithful, that he was faithful. Because if you bring that back into your remembrance, how he delivered you in the past, it's a way to comfort yourself for the present. And I'm almost done here. Verses 6 through 7. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who seek me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. That's wild. David felt this deeply. He felt like, man, he was so hated. He felt like he was so hated. He was like lower than an insect. He said, but I'm a worm, right? A worm. What do people do? You know, kids, they see a worm, they like stomp on it. They trample on the poor little worm. They trample on the poor little worm. I see little creatures and I'm like, no, leave them alone. They're one of God's little creatures. David was saying, I feel like a worm and not a man. You know, he was despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. And so Jesus felt the same way. He was hated, he was despised, he was insulted. Can you imagine what it feels like to be on that cross and all of the people besides his family and those that knew him, but all of those other people were like feeling that way towards him. Good morning, Daddy. Good morning, Debbie. Good morning. God bless you guys. You know, to feel so hated and despised. David was saying this, and this is what was happening to Jesus, right? And we know we're not everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone's going to like us in life. Not everyone's going to like us. They're not going to vibe with us. Some people will like us and many will not, right? And we can live with that. We can live with that. We can live with those people that don't like us. But imagine to be so hated and despised for no reason, that you're mocked to the point of death, right? And that's what was happening to David. And David wrote about this. And then that's what was happening to Jesus on the cross, right? That's what was happening to them. And I don't know anyone, including myself, who could endure that type of hatred towards you without the Lord's help. You know, how could you endure it if the Lord doesn't help you? And so, okay, we're winding it down. Verse 8. It says, David wrote, he trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. David wrote this. He was like, he can hear the people saying, he trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him, right? If he's the Lord's favorite, let the Lord who he delights in rescue him. Man, those are harsh words. David knew what his enemies were saying about him. It's like he can almost hear what they were saying, what they were thinking. And again, imagine you're putting all your hope in the Lord and you expect him to rescue you, and he really hasn't rescued you at that moment, right? Someone with little faith would just throw the towel and say, you know what, God, I don't even think you're real. I don't even think you're real. You haven't rescued me. You must not be real. You know, a situation like this is hard. It will test your faith. It will test your faith. But this very line, he trusts in the Lord, let the Lord rescue him. This line, guess where we heard this line also? In Matthew, in the book of Matthew, chapter 27, in verse 43. The religious leaders were standing around mocking Jesus as he was on the cross. When he was suffering on the cross, they were mocking him. You know, they were insulting him. They were saying, you know, basically they were saying something like, you know, he said he was the Son of God. He saved others. Why can't he save himself? Where's this God that he trusts? Where is he? And so, you know, David spoke these words that were also accomplished in the time of Jesus. You know, they came to pass in the time of Jesus. And so that was very interesting to me to see that. But you know what? David's experience wasn't as bad, right? It wasn't as bad as what Jesus faced. And so this song was very similar to what Jesus faced. Let me lower this a little bit. You know, David dealt with these people, but they weren't like putting him on a cross. Jesus experienced these same exact words, and he was on the cross. And so when David wrote this, he was foreshadowing what Jesus was going to experience. And I'm going to end it here in verse 9 and 10, because like I said, there's 31 verses and we don't have time to go through the whole thing. And I know y'all ain't going to sit up in here to listen to 31 verses, but we're going to break it up. So today was part 1. Verse 9 says, "Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth, I was cast on you. From my mother's womb, you have been my God." So before I spoke about, David said that, he had to go back and remind himself, like, our ancestors trusted you and you delivered them. And now he's going even further back. He's like, even from my mother's womb, I had to trust you. Right. And I believe what he's saying here is that he probably had challenges even at birth. Right. Maybe he was born prematurely. Maybe he was a sick child and his life was in jeopardy. Maybe he wasn't supposed to live. Right. Because he was the youngest of his brothers. So maybe his mom was older at the time when she had him. And so, sometimes when you've had a couple of children, the last one may have some, some medical conditions or whatever. So he was saying, you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. Right? Like he had to cling on to his mom for life. Right? From birth, I was cast on you. Woo. So maybe she had a difficult delivery. It just sounds like he's saying here, he's confessing here that even as a child, even while he was little, he had to cling to life. He had to cling to the Lord to live. And to me, that's powerful. That is powerful. So his whole life has been a struggle, and he's always had to depend on the Lord. So I'm going to leave this right here, guys. I'm going to leave it right here. This was part 1, because like I said, it's long. It is so long, but we will come back to it tomorrow and continue this song of sadness, this song of doubt and uncertainty. But I'll tell you something, what you can take away from this is that we thank God we don't have to suffer in that way, right? Jesus already paid the highest price of suffering. He paid that for us. We would never have to deal with that in our lifetime. But when we do face a situation that's difficult, I want to remind myself, and I want to remind you, if you're watching, that you can go back and remember God's faithfulness. Remember how he's helped you in the past, and not to lose hope. Don't lose hope. And just like God brought David through that situation, just like he brought Jesus through the cross, he's going to bring us through too. He will bring us through. All right. So I am going to leave it right there. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. May the Lord cause you to be successful in everything you set to do today, not tomorrow, not next week, today. Whatever you set your heart to do, the plans that you have, may he cause you to succeed in them today. May he be aligned walking with you so that you may succeed. All right, guys, I will see you mañana. Have a blessed day. Be encouraged, be strengthened, and I will catch you then. God bless you. Ciao, ciao.